All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Once again, from the cloudy Pacific Northwest, our King County Hazardous Waste Management Program. We're based in Seattle, Washington. We're going to be presenting on safer alternatives in hazardous waste management, an equity-based safer alternatives at work and at home. I'm Charles Wu with the King County Hazardous Waste Management Program, and I'm managing supervisor for our hazardous waste unit in the Water and Land Resources Division. I'm also our business services program owner for our small quantity generators program. Presenting a little bit of our program and moderating the session today. A couple reminders, use your direct questions to the Q&A box. And please, we'll answer the questions at the very end. We'll have time for that. Really want to thank all the sponsors for sponsoring the National NAMA Conference this year. It's been great. And I want to thank you once again for your continued support throughout the years. A reminder that the session is being recorded. And these pre-recorded sessions or these sessions will be available after the conference too as well. So if some free time, go ahead and take a look at those. So also, since we have so many panelists today, I'm going to have them all introduce themselves at the beginning of their session. All right, so we want to get going here. A little bit about our program. So our hazardous waste management program mission is to protect public health environment from the risks posed by production, use, storage, and disposal of hazardous materials. Our service area is all the residents and businesses in King County. We are authorized by the Washington State Department of Ecology, the King County Board of Health, and all the jurisdictions in King County. So that's all the cities within the county as well. We are a unified program, so I think we're unique. We include all the 38 cities, 2 tribes, and the unincorporated areas in the county. Our oversight is the 5 partner agencies that you see there in the graphic there. We have about 70 people that are embedded in our 4 partner agencies. And then our distinct lines of businesses are carried out by our multi-agency teams, as well as our budget. The partner agency receives funding from the program. So you'll be hearing from all our different partners here today within our session. We have folks from Water and Land Resources Division and King County Public Health, 2 of our partner agencies. Oops, let me go back one more slide. There we go. So here are some of our program services that we provide. We serve the 2.1 million residents and 60,000 businesses within our county. What we do is we reduce human and environmental exposures from hazardous waste. So I think we're kind of unique compared to other programs around the country. So we just don't really do education, outreach, and disposal pieces. We also do some policy work. So there you see is our secure medicine or medicine return. So we've been working on that. Also, you hear about from Ashley about our PERC dry cleaner project too as well. We do prevention, so business residents program to increase awareness, best practice, and safer alternatives for our businesses as well as our residents in the county. So you'll hear about that from 2 of our presenters, as well as disposal. So we do have fixed facilities, a mobile waste mobile, and city collection events as well. So you might ask, why do we care about racial equity? So part of our racial equity strategic plan that we identified that we are a very diverse and growing service area within the county. And we have found out that communities of color experience disproportionate impacts from hazardous waste materials. So our commitment is to provide relevant, equitable, and culturally appropriate and responsive services for our businesses, as well as those residents in King County. Our new strategic plan embeds racial equity into program services and practices. So if you were on yesterday afternoon for us in King County, learned a little bit about racial equity strategic plan from Minty, Mattia, Enrique, and Linda Ransley, our program director. So they talked about the plan. They talked about some of the implementation around the staff pieces about it too as well. Today, we're going to talk about how we actually embed that in our services. How do we put our plan to action? Actually, the boots on the ground work that we're doing. So these are all the panelists. They've been doing that work. We want to share that with you. Also, we want to talk about safer alternatives. Why do we care about safer alternatives? Well, there's more evidence showing that the impact of chemicals to health in the environment. There's obesogen. So are chemicals making us fat? I hope so. That's my excuse for being a little bit overweight. There's earlier puberty in girls that we're finding. Epigenetics, so there's gene changes with these chemical exposures that we're all dealing with within this industry. Endocrine disrupting chemicals, you get diseases from that. Also, studies found that chemicals and plastics may be feminizing boys too as well. I remember some of that research that's done down in BC at Simon Fraser University. And also, exposure to common chemicals may cause an IQ drop. So I think that's something that Matt will be talking about with lead too as well. So that's why we care about safer alternatives and why we care about racial equity. Here's my contact information here. There's a little bit of taste of the Pacific Northwest. That is a king or Chinook salmon that I caught off of Commencement Bay in Tacoma. So I'm gonna turn over to Larry Brown, and he's gonna talk a little bit more about auto body shops and safer alternatives to that. Larry?
Thank you, Charles, and thank you everyone for joining our session today. And I'm a health and environmental investigator with Public Health, Seattle and King County. And I've been actually involved with the program since about January of 1992, so it's been a while. And in the early days of the program, we actually visited auto body shops. It was one of the industries we visited. And in those days, our focus was pretty much on proper hazardous waste management. But I'm going to talk today about a more recent project that had a focus of safer alternatives. Next. And how did we incorporate safer alternative principles? I'll talk about that in just a minute, but first I want to talk about, next. Just how do you paint a car, because we're talking about auto body shops and car painting. And so there's three main steps. If you just look at it, there's kind of variations of this, but in the general, it's three main steps. There's a primer step, there's a base coat step, and a clear coat step. And when we were doing the research for the project, we found that it looked like the best opportunity to work with this industry to perhaps shift them to a safer alternative was the base coat step, because available in King County, there was waterborne as well as solvent-borne products, whereas for the primer and clear coat steps, they were basically only solvent-borne was available. So next. So just a little bit about what types of base coats there are. There's high VOC solvent-borne base coats. There's low VOC solvent-borne base coats, and we found no shop in King County that's actually using low VOC solvent-borne. And then there's waterborne, which are also low VOC. And I think probably most of you know what VOCs are. They're volatile organic compounds. And the term that as used when you're working with auto body painting is in reference to VOCs as photoreactive chemicals. VOC can also be used as a general term, used more broadly to mean organic chemicals that have a high vapor pressure at ordinary room temperature. But we're looking at it from an auto body point of view from a photoreactive chemical aspect. Next. Why move auto body shops to waterborne base coats? If one wants to reduce the potential for photochemical smog formation, that's one reason. And there's also other health and environmental impacts. Next. So a little bit about VOCs, as I mentioned, these are photoreactive chemicals, and so they interact with nitrogen oxides and sunlight, and they form ozone, which is photochemical smog. Next. And various regulations around the world and also in the US, they do not allow the use of high VOC solvent-borne base coats. And so the areas in green would not allow the use of high VOC solvent-borne base coats, which Washington State is not one of those areas. And so we had them being used within King County. Next. There's not a lot of formal epidemiological evidence linking various health impacts to auto body painters, but there are some studies that have been done. Next. But there's definitely a lot of potential health impacts from volatile organic compounds. There's short-term side effects and long-term side effects, and you can see this list. And one of the long-term is the painter's syndrome. And so next. So we were at the point where we felt waterborne was a good opportunity, perhaps work with auto body shops. But we wanted to make sure that it was a really safer alternative to a high VOC solvent-borne. So that's where we did an alternative assessment. Next. Basically, an alternatives assessment, if you don't already know, it's basically a process for comparing alternatives, usually to a chemical of concern, and identifying those that are safer. And in my opinion, the gold standard for selecting safer alternatives is the alternatives assessment process. And there's various guidance documents that can help you do an alternatives assessment. Next. Basically, what you're looking at is a lot of different assessment modules. Obviously, hazard and exposure are the two modules that have the most to do with risk. But I also want to emphasize the importance of also doing cost, availability, performance. You could do social impacts. We also added waste management because you might have something that's of low risk because of hazard or exposure, but if it costs so much more, or it's not even available, or it doesn't even work, no one's going to want to use it. So it's really important to look at a full picture to really select a good, safer alternative. Next. So these are just real briefly some results from our hazard assessment. And as you can see, we compared a lot of different waterborne products to solvent-borne products. And this waterborne products contain fewer chemicals of concern and also fewer chemicals of potential concern. But as you can see, there is still chemicals, hazardous chemicals, even within something like called waterborne. And so that points out the importance of when we talk about chemicals, we always use the word safer. There's virtually no chemical that is totally safe. Even water, you can get too much water. So it's always different degrees of safer when you're talking about chemicals. Next. In our exposure study, we found, and we did personal breathing zone monitoring, and we found that definitely the high VOC solvent-borne base coats, there was a higher exposure to VOC than there was to waterborne, to the painters. Next. Real quickly, in terms of cost, availability, and performance, they're pretty comparable to each other, waterborne versus solvent-borne. Waterborne paint costs a little bit more, but use less paint to paint the car. So in the long run, you might actually be more productive with waterborne. They're both available in King County. The performance is about equal. And from a waste management point of view, I think probably in general, you're going to generate less waterborne hazardous waste. But in Washington State, we have a regulation related to halogenated organic compounds. So that can cause some waste is designated as hazardous waste that might not designate in many other states. Next. So anyway, based on our alternative assessment, we felt that waterborne was a safer alternative. And so we made the decision to start an incentive project. And so we found that there was about 200 auto body shops in King County, and about 100 of them were already using solvent-borne. And so we felt there's still about 100 shops that we could help switch to waterborne using an incentive project. So we started out with an incentive project at 50% up to $10,000, and then we increased it to 50% up to $20,000 incentive money. Next. We involved a lot of different stakeholders in the project planning, certainly the auto body shops, the distributors and jobbers that sell auto body paint. We had focus groups. We involved energy utilities in case there's any energy aspects to converting over to waterborne. We've involved community development, financial institution loan programs that tend to loan to businesses that banks might not be willing to loan to. Certainly government agencies, Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, Department of Ecology, and non-government organizations such as the Pollution Prevention Resource Center. Next. So how did we incorporate racial equity? We definitely followed the Hazardous Equity Guide to Planning, and the Equity Guide to Planning asks various questions that you ask and you answer in relationship to what project you're doing. We also attempted to interview all shops and ask the primary language and ethnicity of the owners and painters to get a better understanding of the community of auto body shops. We found that English, Spanish, and Vietnamese were the three most common languages within the auto body industry in King County. And so we had the project literature translated into all those three languages. We attempted to coordinate with multi-ethnic chambers of commerce that serve businesses and communities of color. We also reached out with Spanish-speaking staff to Spanish-speaking shops to help market the project. And we coordinated with a non-government organization, the Environmental Coalition of South Seattle, who works with multicultural communities within King County. And they gave us a list of 16 multicultural or Spanish and Vietnamese body shops. So we were able to use data to then map it. This is just an example of like the language of the owner, the primary owner, or the owner of the auto body shop, and overlaid over King County. So we could see where they're located in relationship to the rest of King County. And then we also could overlay over a map of King County, you know, whether the shop is waterborne, whether it's solvent-borne shop, and the percent people of color in the various areas of the county to see where these shops are located in terms of perhaps vulnerable populations. So project results, we had 6 shops converted from solvent to waterborne. The shops had about a year to commit to the project, and then they had a year to actually make the conversion. 6 shops, a little less than we were hoping for, but we had 3 of the shops were of non-white owners, shops located in 6 different cities, 4 of which were in the more diverse South King County. We reduced VOCs by an estimated 1,410 pounds per year, and we reimbursed the shops about $120,000. Some lessons learned. It's not necessarily easy to gather racial equity data over the phone. And we did have a significant number of unknowns. You definitely need time. You need to give yourself time to really get to know communities and know your community. And also, if you have the stakeholders do marketing like we did, it's important to have them keep a list of who they actually told about the project, which we did not have set up. And so they could tell us about how many shops they told, but not who they told. So it was a little uncertain at the end of the project how many shops really knew about it. So next. And our alternatives assessment is available on our website. And here's my contact information. And thank you very much.
Great. Can people hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Great. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this session. Thank you, Larry, for that very interesting presentation. My name is Ashley Evans, and I'm on the Haz Waste Policy team. I will be discussing our initiative to achieve a PERC-free King County. This will just be a high-level overview of the program. Perchloroethylene, or PERC, is the most used solvent in the dry cleaning industry. PERC is highly toxic to humans, causing cancer as well as reproductive and neurological effects. Workers at dry cleaning businesses are particularly at risk for high exposure and resulting health impacts. PERC is also a persistent environmental pollutant, and it is specifically a water contamination issue. Leaking equipment and improper disposal can lead to PERC being released into the environment and making its way into stormwater and groundwater. There are nearly 200 cleanup sites in King County contaminated by PERC from dry cleaners. Cleanup costs can be very expensive, sometimes up to millions of dollars per site. And communities can be exposed to PERC through drinking water and vapor intrusion. Perk pollution from dry cleaning is also a racial equity issue. In our research and outreach, we found that over 80% of King County dry cleaners are owned by people that identify as Korean, and that dry cleaners are more likely to be in economically disadvantaged neighborhoods. So in 2018, the Hazardous program started a project with the goal of perk-free King County by 2025. We set up a voucher program to provide perk dry cleaners with $20,000 grants to help cover their costs to switch to the safest alternative, which is professional wet cleaning. And professional wet cleaning uses water instead of organic solvents. A voucher approach was chosen because our survey data and outreach with the dry cleaning community suggested that financial barriers were the main reason why these dry cleaners were not already moving to these newer technologies. So far, we have helped 30 dry cleaners in the county switch to professional wet cleaning. Approximately 20 dry cleaner shops remain that use perk. Of the 30 shops that received vouchers and switched to professional wet cleaning, 29 of those were BIPOC owned, largely Korean, but we also had several other nationalities. Figure 1 shows the results of a 6-month follow-up survey. Nearly all the dry cleaning shop owners were happy with their decision to switch to professional wet cleaning. We did our best to provide ongoing technical assistance and problem solving to the businesses and to the vendors to make the conversion as smooth as possible. And some of these dry cleaners we worked with significantly for quite a while after the switch, just to make sure they could learn the new technology and be successful in their businesses. 11 shop owners also responded that their health had improved since they switched, including reductions in coughs, headaches, open sores on their hands, and eye irritation. We believe that the success of this program was due to political support from elected officials, partnerships with the vendor community, trusted interactions and relationships with the dry cleaning business owners and the other people that worked at the dry cleaning shops, and the initiation of a similar financial incentive program by the Washington State Department of Ecology, which I will talk about more in a minute. A few of our lessons learned include ensuring that the perk dry cleaning machines are removed in a way that protects human health and the environment. After the first shop or two, we needed to add in additional protocols. So we spent a lot of time figuring out how to best actually remove the perk machine. Another lesson learned is ensuring that hazardous process chemicals, such as the spot cleaners that are used to treat stains before the clothes go in the machines, are removed from the shops and replaced with safer alternatives, and that the shops continue to use those safer alternative process chemicals. We've been sharing our results and lessons learned with federal EPA staff. EPA is currently developing new regulations for PERC under the amended Toxic Substances Control Act law. So we've been working with EPA on this as well. Now I'm going to share quickly a couple slides about the Washington State Dry Cleaner Replacement Program on behalf of Miles Perkins at Department of Ecology. So ecology, so the state of Washington's Department of Ecology started a similar program a year after us in 2019. And their program grew out of our program and also changes at the state regulations on adding new prohibitions on the misting of PERC wastewater. Ecology initially, like us, provided $20,000 grants to dry cleaners to switch to professional wet cleaning. And it also provided $10,000 grants if the shop wanted to switch to hydrocarbon, from PERC to hydrocarbon and not professional wet cleaning. This summer, Ecology was able to secure more funding from the state legislature and increased its voucher amount to $40,000 if the PERC dry cleaner switches to professional wet cleaning. What we found was that in King County, where shops were able to get $20,000 from our program and then $20,000 from ecology for a total of $40,000, a lot more shops then were able to switch. The total cost to switch is around $55,000. So at the $40,000 mark, a lot more shops were then able to switch. So that's why ecology sought the increase in funding and was able to get the increase in funding. So again, this summer, ecology started offering $40,000 vouchers for PERC shops switching to professional wet cleaning. Okay, next slide. Oh, you're already there. Okay, so the results of ecology's program, across the state, 72 vouchers have been issued, 52 PERC machines replaced. They have spent at the state level, you can see here, $1.15 million, and the average time between voucher issued and reimbursement is 140 days. And ecology is also working with EPA on their new regulations. And I think that is it. Happy to take any questions at the end of the whole presentation. Thank you so much.
All right,
Hello,
thank
everybody.
you, Ashley.
I'll just introduce myself real quick. My name is Justin Meyer. I'm on the King County Business Services Program, and I'm one of the co-managers of the Degreaser project you're about to hear about.
Awesome. We're going to do a little kind of an interview process here to switch it up a little bit in our presentation. So Justin, what were the goals of this project?
Yeah, the ultimate goal, like our program's goal, is to reduce the community's exposure to hazardous substances. We're targeting degreasers. These are things like brake cleaners to parts washers, like you see on the screen, and even more household cleaning product type degreasers.
Awesome.
And we aim, this is kind of a pilot, so we're trying to help 50 businesses transition to safer alternatives.
Okay, so who else is involved in this project? Sounds like a really good one that we're starting here in the county.
Yeah, like the panelists today, it's the King County Haz Waste program. There's multiple teams, the field team, which I'm a part of. There's the racial equity team, the research team, communications, and more. So it's definitely a big group effort. The King County businesses involved, obviously, as well as the Washington State Department of Ecology. Similar to the PERC dry cleaner program you just heard about, both King County and Department of Ecology are operating degreaser replacement programs right now. And so we're coordinating to make sure that these projects are in line with each other.
Yeah, that's great. So like with all the different hazardous products that are used within, in Washington, King County, the US, why are we focusing on degreasers?
Yeah, there's a few main reasons. One is that we know there's very hazardous compounds in many degreasers. Like in dry cleaners, PERC is also very common in a lot of automotive repair degreasers, like brake cleaners and parts washers. There's also things like trichloroethylene or TCE, methylene chloride, xylenes, toluene, and other EPA-listed hazardous air pollutants. And we know that these compounds cause things like cancer, nervous system damage, organ toxicity, developmental and reproductive issues. We also know that degreasers are super widespread. They're in a whole lot of industries, everything from aerospace and automotive repair to jewelry stores and even restaurants. And again, it can be anything from a massive multi-million-dollar aerospace industry vapor degreaser to a small bottle of all-purpose cleaner slash degreaser. And importantly, we're also targeting degreasers because we know that there's quite a few viable, cost-effective, available, safer alternative degreasers out on the market right now.
That's great. We heard about Larry, Ashley's way about helping businesses. So, how is the business services program transitioning these businesses to safer alternative degreasers?
Yeah, we have a really similar approach in the way that we also have a financial incentive. we're offering a 75% reimbursement voucher, which goes up to $5,000, which should cover the cost of most parts washers with some investment from the business as well. In addition, we're also offering trial products. And this is an idea we got by looking at other programs, safer alternative degreaser programs. I'd like to call out the Minnesota Technical Assistance Program. They gave us some good information on their brake cleaner replacement efforts. So we're actually able to hand a business a case of safer alternative brake cleaner, let them try it out, let them try out other EPA safer choice products and see if it works for them. And if so, able to provide quite a bit of funding to help them transition.
Yeah, and also, I'm sure racial equity was really taken consideration. So how did you incorporate that in this project?
Yeah, we used a few tools to incorporate it. We used racial equity from the get-go, but we used demographic data, industry-specific organic solvent exposure data to various demographics, and health disparity maps. And we used all this to essentially make maps similar to what you saw in Larry's presentation. And this ultimately lets us prioritize which industries and which geographies to prioritize and which to go out to first based on how many BIPOC employees are exposed to various degreaser products.
That's great. And then also, safer alternative principles. We've been talking about this within our session here. How did you incorporate that into the project?
Yeah, so we use chemical hazard analysis with every product that we encounter in the field that's a degreaser and any potential safer alternative product. We look at every chemical and use tools such as ChemHat, Pharos, Skyvera to determine what the hazards are for each chemical and make sure that they meet a certain criteria to be safer alternatives. We also use certification programs like Cradle to Cradle and EPA's Safer Choice program. And these are kind of minimum qualifications for reimbursement.
Got it. Okay. Sounds like, really great project. So how far along are you in the project? And, when do you think you'll be complete with this and be able to share more information with the folks at NAMA?
Yeah, we're still in the pilot phase. And so far we've got about 10 businesses trialing alternative products and 30 businesses who have expressed interest in participating in this program. Again, our goal is working with 50 businesses, so we're about halfway there.
All right. And what are some of the next steps since we're just kind of halfway there right now?
Yeah, the next steps are to get safer alternatives in the hands of all the shops, whether that's through permanent transitions or trial products. And ultimately, we'll use this information we get from the pilot project to inform how to proceed in hopefully a multi-year, more like hundreds of shop scale degreaser project. So what we learn from this pilot will influence what we do at King County for the next few years. And we'll hopefully be able to share a lot of success stories with everybody at NAMA.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. I'm going to move over now to Julie Prasar. She's with our residential services program.
Hi, everybody. My name is Julia Presar. I'm a project manager and educator for the residential services program in the hazardous waste management program in King County. And we're also going to do a little bit of an interview process here. My colleagues have been talking about our work with businesses. I'm going to be talking about our work with people in their homes. In this case, but it would have been in their homes except for COVID. So these are, I'm referring to virtual home visits.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Looking forward to chatting with you about this. So, why do you talk to people about having a safer, healthy home? What's the purpose of that?
Well, my purpose and the purpose of our program is the mission. The purpose of this project is the mission of our program, which is to reduce people's exposure to hazardous materials so they can live their healthiest possible lives. People spend a lot of time in their homes, and so that's why we focus there.
Awesome. So I'd ask the other panelists too, how did you lead with racial equity in the area of safer alternatives in people's homes?
Well, what we found, as has been said by many already, is that the best way to reach a community is to work with people who are the community. A community-based organization knows their community, their culture, and the languages spoken. Residential services program works as a team to make a equitable choice regarding which community-based organization we fund through grants or contracts.
So can you tell us a little bit more about the groups you worked with? I know you've worked with quite a few in the past, and I think you have some up on the slide here too.
Yeah. Well, I'll just talk about one group, and
Okay.
that they are pictured on the slide. That is Mother Africa, or some of the health promoters from Mother Africa. The community that Mother Africa serves are immigrants and refugees from Africa and the Middle East. And we're in the second year of a 3-year project with them, which we're calling the Safer Healthy Homes Project. And we're reaching communities that speak Arabic, French, and Mai, which is a language spoken in Somalia.
That's cool. You know, I think a lot of work has been done with Spanish-speaking individuals around safer alternatives in their homes. You know, how did you get started with Mother Africa in this community?
Well, we actually had an invitation. In this case, our public health colleagues took a call from Mother Africa, who was asking for help to share toxics information. So we were able to jump in, residential services jumped in really quickly, and we provided a workshop and a field trip. We worked with interpreters, and from those activities, we realized that Hazardous and Mother Africa have a common interest, which is to share safety information, and that our two groups have complementary assets.
Okay, so, you know, can you share with us what complementary assets mean? I'm not too sure of that term there.
Well, I made that up. But what it means is that it was the mutual recognition that each partner had something that the other needed and to reach their community. Mother Africa had built and nurtured community connections. Mother Africa knows how to reach their communities, and they have cultural knowledge. Hazardous has granting and contracting ability, and we have subject matter expert knowledge on healthy homes issues. And both groups had experience teaching.
Oh, that's great. So, you know, I heard the term of co-creation mentioned in equity work. You know, how did you do that? And if so, you know, how did it work out for you all?
Well, co-creation was actually a founding principle in our project. We came together, Mother Africa and Hazardous came together to draft the project. And we all, so that was in itself a co-creation, a co-creative activity. And we decided we wanted to use co-creation throughout the project, even though we all acknowledged we weren't really sure exactly how to do it or what that was going to look like, but we thought we would try. And in practice, what it has turned out to be is it's evidenced in various different ways. In one, we co-create, there's in process, we see co-creation in our process. Hazardous shares power, responsibility, and decision-making with Mother Africa. We co-create agendas, and I'm thoughtful about who speaks and when. And a big area in process was when there were times when we didn't necessarily agree on a way to move forward, that we just allowed that several weeks to come to a consensus on how to move forward. So we just allowed ourselves time to figure it out. Another area of co-creation was our output. As we talked about what topics the community was interested in, we heard a lot of concern from the Mother African community about mold in their homes. And although Hazardous strongly sees reducing the use of bleach as being in our domain, we don't necessarily see concern about health effects from mold or mold reduction behaviors as being squarely in our mission. But since we're co-creating this process, this project, we listened to our partners and we worked together to make a flyer that answered the needs of both partners and recognize the culture of the communities that we're reaching. And there's a part of the flyer is up on this, up on my slide, daily exposures to mold in your home may cause. And you see that that's one of the flyers we created. Another way that we experience co-creation or we practice co-creation, I would say, is in our educational approach. The key messages of the Safer Healthy Homes project, which I'm talking about, are pretty comparable to every other healthy home type of project. Where co-creation came in is that the Mother Africa team really wanted to connect participants to their former homes and former cleaning practices through stories and dialogue. And so that's how we began the virtual home visit, connecting to what did you used to do? What was it like? How was your home built? And then comparing it to what do you do now? What's your home built out of now? So those are some of the ways that we practice co-creation.
Okay. So, we're talking about safer alternatives today too as well. So what were some of the key messages around safer alternatives with Mother Africa?
Well, we connect on the universal issue of cleaning. And then we ask people if they or anyone they know has ever been harmed while cleaning. And this often really engages people. That let us share information about how to identify hazardous products and safer alternatives through reading labels and the meaning of signal words. You can see our shopper's card in the middle of the slide. We also taught about the Environmental Protection Agency Safer Choice label. And everyone, and I do mean everyone, is surprised to know that there is a hierarchy of hazard hidden in the advertising claims and technical terms that we all see on household products.
That's great. So, I have a question for you. It might be a little personal. So you are a white woman partnering with the women of, with a bunch of women of color and immigrants and refugees. You have personal, institutional privileges. How did you navigate these complex relationships to be equitable?
Well, I had a lot of help. And first thing I want to do is call out Hazardous Waste Program leadership, because the leadership has supported our staff through many trainings about systemic racism, white privilege, and microaggressions, to name a few. So I had some background knowledge. I'm also fortunate to work with a really diverse team, which at that time included Charles Wu, thank you, Charles, who could help me talk through meeting dynamics or places where the process was seeming stuck, and help me figure out what was actually happening, how or if I was contributing, and what next steps might be. Over this time, I really learned to value what Mother Africa was bringing to the table, and to be always as I could remember, to be aware of my personal and institutional privilege. And these things seem really obvious now as I say them and looking back, but they weren't obvious at the time. It was something that we learned, and graciously Mother Africa allowed me and our program to learn them together.
Thanks, Julia, for really sharing that personal information. And, that's awesome. And I think that's something really important we have to remember when we're working with community there, what you just shared. So what lessons have you learned that might help others who want to do something similar?
Well, there are a lot of lessons, but I'll mention a few. And I'm happy to talk in more detail if people want more information. We have an annual report. We've got a lot of data and blah, blah, blah in the background. But the most important thing I would say is that lessons learned is that relationships are real and they are key. Allow time for your relationship with your community-based organization to develop and grow. You just don't know what that's going to look like as you're starting. It's a process. And the other thing is develop relationships with folks in your organization who can coach and mentor you. And for example, I would say Charles Wu and others on my leadership team who are BIPOC members themselves, who are able to coach and support me, which I super needed and appreciated. Another lesson learned would be, I would say, to be prepared to be uncomfortable. You won't always know what's going to happen next. When you as a government agency are sharing power and decision making, you aren't the boss of everything, and that's okay. And that is also sometimes where the unexpected creativity happens. Another thing that a lesson learned is we would suggest finding enough funding to have at least a 2-year project. This will allow relationships to grow, as I mentioned, but also for the topic to be more fully understood and to be able to modify whatever your approach is based on the experience of your partners and their participants. In our case, this allowed our work to be more efficient in the 2nd year, and we were able to add a 3rd language group. The last thing I would say is to try to relax and enjoy the process and have fun. not only will that be more fun for you, or in this case me, but it will also be more fun for your community partners, and everyone will be happier, and it'll be it'll be more fun getting together and doing this work.
Oh, that's awesome, Julia. Thank you for sharing. And no, it's been a great project so far, and really, looking forward to what you started and continuing with this and community and others too as well. So thanks for sharing. Any questions, we'll have some time for the Q&A hopefully. Next up is Matt Wilson. So Matt, are you up on the screen?
I believe so, yeah.
Hey, there you are. Awesome.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Charles. Hi, everyone. I'm glad to have you all here. I'm Matt Wilson. I'm a health and environmental investigator for Public Health Seattle King County. I'm also a member of the Residential Services Program team alongside Julia Presser. And I'm ready to share about our wonderful cookware exchange work that we've done recently.
Awesome, thanks, Matt. So, what's the story here behind this? This sounds, looks pretty interesting. A bunch of cookware there on the slide deck there.
Yeah, so part of my role in Hazardous Waste and Public Health is performing on-site lead investigations for families in King County with children who have been overly exposed to lead. As many of us, I'm sure here know, lead is toxic to humans, especially for young children, as it can hinder their growth and neural development, making learning more difficult for them, among other issues. And no amount of lead is safe, and lead exposure is completely preventable. So whenever we find it, we try to remove it or strategize how to mitigate exposure to it. Dust in lead-based paint in older homes is by far the largest contributor of childhood lead poisoning, but there are other sources of lead that can be found around the home. And so during these investigations, we'll often include screening household items like cookware using a device much like this called a X-ray fluorescence analyzer, or XRF gun as we just refer to it as here. And we look for any potential sources of lead. And so during these investigations, if we identify any cookware as containing lead, then we offer families lead-free replacements free of charge.
Oh, awesome. So why cookware exchange? Just wondering about that piece of it.
Yeah, for sure. So a large proportion of our lead investigation caseload are refugee children who have just resettled in King County with their families. Children from Afghanistan in particular appear to be disproportionately impacted by lead exposure, with roughly 1 of every 3 Afghan child screened for lead having elevated levels. So it's a rate much higher than children from other countries that are being screened. And we discovered that a common source of lead in their families' homes were aluminum cookware, primarily cooking pots and pressure cookers. And we recognized early on that it wasn't enough to just simply identify this cookware as having lead and just simply suggesting to the family to just stop using it and look elsewhere. We understood that that purchasing, finding replacements for cookware, especially ones that the family would feel okay with, like feel comfortable that it was a safer alternative, was a barrier for many of these families. And most didn't have the time or the money to, really shop around and look at their options. And frankly, for many families, this cookware was their only means to prepare meals. So to say you can't use this anymore, it really kind of leaves them kind of high and dry. So we identified the service gap, and we recognized that we had the resources to address it. And so we wanted to step in and provide replacement safer cookware for these families.
Oh, that's great. That's like a direct impact. I'm sure, they're resettling to the country. They don't have time to go shopping for cookware. And I'm glad that, we as a program was able to just get them that's safe for them. So imagine you had to have, some help to pull this off. Who'd you partner with on this great project?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. So it's impossible to do this work with our lead investigation team alone. Partnerships with the King County Public Health Clinic and our local community-based organization, Afghan Health Initiative, were really huge in helping us build trust with families and providing them culturally relevant information and resources. Without those partnerships, we would have been unable to reach nearly as many of these families as we had. And we also would have likely missed out on the fact that a lot of this cookware for families holds sentimental value to them, which adds just another barrier as to, how to help families, part ways from this cookware that obviously contains this hazardous material that they really shouldn't be introducing to themselves. And for identifying that cookware, we turn to our Haz Waste research team for help. And I see it in the chat already. So Katie's going to have this awesome full presentation about the work behind that. So I'll just hang on tight for that. But I will say that their work paid off and safer lead-free alternatives were identified by them. And we were able to offer those options to families.
That's awesome. So, this has been great, but, so what's the impact been for those families so far? If you could tell us a little bit more about that piece of it.
Yeah, so since rolling this out, just since last year, we were able to, up to date, hand out 31 pieces of replacement cookware, which has impacted roughly 69 children who are identified as having elevated blood lead levels. And we learned from post-visit evaluations that were conducted by Afghan Health Initiative's community health worker that by far the majority of families were really satisfied with how the new cookware was prepping their food. So we're happy to hear that.
Wow, that's awesome. So what's next? You've been doing all this great work, partnering with the Afghan Health Initiative, and we know more Afghan families are potentially coming to the Pacific Northwest and specifically King County.
Right, exactly. So as you mentioned, there's been an influx of families from Afghanistan coming to the US in the recent weeks due to the events taking place back at home. And many of those families are settling in King County, and refugee resettlement programs and other community organizations are just working around the clock tirelessly to help connect them with resources, including, and most importantly, housing. And so we're working closely and listening to these refugee resettlement programs and community leaders and how we can best support the community at this time. And currently we're looking into how we might be able to distribute our safe cookware that we identified out to these newly arrived families to help support them.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. I see Matt's contact information is there on the slide too as well. And you have any questions, we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. Next up is Katie Fellow. She's going to kind of talk a little bit more about the follow-up that Matt's been discussing earlier. So turn over to Katie.
Great, thanks, Charles. So hello, I'm Katie Fellows. I'm an exposure scientist and project manager with the Haz Waste Program's Research Services team. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about the work that we've been doing around preventing lead poisoning from aluminum cookware and assessing safer alternative cookware. Next. So for a brief background, King County is home to a large and diverse refugee community, as you heard from Matt and Julia, who are often impacted by lead poisoning. And so because of this, refugees receive a health screening examination, including testing blood lead levels after arrival to the US. And this is provided by Public Health Seattle and King County. And between 2018 and 2020, this surveillance program identified nearly 400 elevated blood lead level cases among refugee children and found that children in the Afghan community were disproportionately affected. Now, cases in immigrant children are typically associated with exposure to spices and candies and traditional cosmetics and medicines. And while these sources are important for Afghan children, previously unknown lead exposure source from cooking pots was identified through these in-home environmental evaluations. So we therefore started a study to better understand the issue and to find appropriate cookware to offer these families as a safer alternative. Lead in cookware is usually associated with lead glazed ceramics. Leaching of lead out of this type of cookware and into food is related to use and dish composition as well as food characteristics. And only recently has aluminum cookware been found to contain lead. In the past several years, a few studies have assessed aluminum cookware used in developing countries. However, many questions have yet to be answered. Now, lead makes its way into aluminum cookware in non-industrialized countries as it's typically locally made, often from discarded scrap metal. And sources of this scrap metal varies, anything from soda cans, car and motorbike engine parts, radiators, airplane fuselages, lead batteries, to computer and electronic components. And YouTube videos of aluminum smelting and casting confirm this. Here you see a man smelting aluminum from various scrap mechanical and industrial parts in a Pakistan junkyard. So the scrap is heated in this makeshift furnace where it hits its melting point, and molten aluminum, as well as any other contaminants on the scrap metal, comes out at the bottom. The molten metal is then formed into ingots or blocks of metal and left to cool and harden, then rolled and pressed into thin sheets, cut to shape, and spun or stamped into form. And another way of manufacturing aluminum cookware is through a casting process where the molten metal is poured directly into sand molds. So here we see an aluminum pot being cast in a Vietnam village. And you can find videos such as these from areas all over the world, the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and likely elsewhere, suggesting that the practice of using lead-containing scrap to manufacture cookware is widespread. This also suggests that lead may not be the only contaminant of concern in this cookware. So this is not simply a problem found elsewhere in the world. Families are bringing this cookware with them as they immigrate here to the US. And even more alarming is that we have found cookware being sold locally that contains lead. So with the help of an Afghan community member, I visited several markets frequented by the community and bought aluminum cookware that was representative of the type of cookware the community might purchase. We also purchased a few items from popular online marketplaces. And additionally, we purchased stainless steel cookware items to test whether this type of cookware is a good, safer alternative to aluminum. And we started, go back a slide, there we go. We started by screening using X-ray fluorescence, or XRF. And XRF is a non-destructive analytical technique. It's used to determine the elemental composition of materials, which allows us to detect and even quantify elements. And we made sure to look at every part of the pot, from the top and bottom of the lid to the inside and outside of the walls and base of the pot, as well as any handles, valves, such as those found on pressure cookers, and hardware, such as rivets that attach handles to the pot. And the lead content of the cookware often varied across these parts. We typically found higher lead levels in handle hardware, as well as the valves and stems on pressure cookers. So release of this lead and other metals into food during cooking and storage likely represents a pretty significant route of exposure. And although standard methods are available to measure leaching of lead from ceramics, there is no current standard method for measuring heavy metals leached from metal cookware. So because of this, we worked with the University of Washington to develop a leaching method. And previous studies have found that leachability in aluminum cookware increases with temperature, age, and use of the cookware, and acidity of foods prepared. So consequently, for our study, we used 4% acetic acid to mimic more acidic foods that might be cooked, which we brought to a simmer for 15 minutes using a portable electric stovetop to mimic cooking, followed by 24 hours sitting at room temperature to mimic food storage, which we heard from community is a common practice. And then we handed these samples off to the UW, who used established EPA methods to detect the metals. And in addition to lead, they also looked for the other metals that are listed here. So before I go into the results, in order to know whether the amount of lead that may leach out of the cookware and into food is above acceptable levels, we have to know how much leachate represents a serving of food. And previous studies have suggested 250 milliliters, or approximately 1 cup. So this is what we decided to use as well. And additionally, the Food and Drug Administration's maximum daily intake for lead from food, or the interim reference level, is 3 micrograms per day for children and 12.5 micrograms per day for adults. These IRLs are derived from a blood lead level of 5 micrograms per deciliter, which is the CDC's reference value to identify children with high blood lead levels. And it's worth also noting that the FDA has applied an additional uncertainty factor of 10 to this. And these IRLs are not regulatory limits. They are just estimates that are used by the FDA in assessing the safety of lead exposure from food. So finally, some summary results for select pieces of cookware we assessed. We have data for 49 items, which is way too much to show you today. So I've just chosen a selection that is representative of the ranges we saw. Next. So these XRF results are averages of the concentrations found across the lid, body, and handles of the cookware. Now for the leachate study, none of the pots on this slide exceeded the infant IRL of 3 micrograms per day. And next, we let the pot sit for 24 hours after coming off heat, and you'll notice that the amount of lead measured in the leachate at this point is significantly higher. The cookware on this next slide are those whose lead leachate levels resulted in a dose that was greater than the FDA IRL. We now see a mixture of both donated cookware and cookware purchased locally. The XRF screening showed much higher levels of lead in these items, with some very high readings in cookpot 9 coming from the valve stems on the lid. And we start to see that after 15 minutes of simmering, most of these cookpots exceed either the infant or both the infant and adult IRL. But by 24 hours of sitting, all of the cookpots result in doses much greater than the IRL, on the order of 10. You can go to the next, Charles. So on the order of 10 to 20 to nearly 50 times higher, as is the case with cookpot 40. Next. Finally, the cookware on this slide are those whose lead leachate levels would result in a dose that is more than 100 times the FDA IRL. I chose a mixture of donated and purchased cookware. Worth noting that cookpots 48 and 49 are brand new traditional Afghan pressure cookers that were bought online, shipped from Minnesota, where they had been imported from Russia and originally acquired in Afghanistan. The XRF screening suggested significant amounts of lead in these cookpots, and we can see that after only 15 minutes of simmering, nearly all of these pots resulted in doses exceeding the IRL. And this was significantly exacerbated after 24 hours of sitting. Now the amounts of lead in the leachate would result in doses that are upwards of 600 times greater than the FDA IRL for cookpots 48 and 49. Next slide. So you'll notice that I only showed results for the aluminum cookware, as nearly all of the stainless steel cookware was non-detectable for lead during the XRF screening, and only one stainless steel pressure cooker with a brass valve stem contained lead that leached out during the leachate study. So as of right now, it does appear that stainless steel is a good, safer alternative to aluminum cookware, something that we feel confident in recommending. And I want to close by acknowledging the efforts of our residential services team, who are the feet on the ground visiting these homes to identify sources of lead poisoning, as well as Steve Whitaker, manager of the research services team for Haz Waste. And this work also would not have been possible without the help of the UW's Environmental Health Lab and my intern Yoni, who helped me complete the lab work, literally watching pots come to a boil all day long. And with that, I think we are done and happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. Thank you all for your presentations. I think we have a couple minutes available for questions. So stop sharing. There we go. All right, let's see. Let's see the Q&A. Go ahead if you have any Q&A questions. Go ahead and pop them in there.
Charles, I answered a couple just because they were both asking the same question, which is how do we get money? And I actually kind of defer to you, but how do we fund these projects? And I just was like, they're in our budget, but the question would maybe be like, how did that happen? So I defer to you.
Oh yeah, definitely. Sure. Yeah, so to kind of answer that question, we're really lucky that our funding comes from, actually, we're a utility. So it comes from garbage and sewer. That's a little bit on, your gallons for your sewage, and then depending off your residential or your business, it's on your garbage bill too as well. So I think it's a little as $1 per bill cycle for residents, but we have over 2.2 million people within the county, so that helps us fund our projects. Our program budget's about $20 million annually, so that kind of gives you an idea of definitely some of the funding that we get. We had a question from Dawn. So Katie, your sampling protocol looks great. It seems to be a publishable study. Have you? Go ahead, Katie.
Yes, we are currently working on writing up the results of the study, and we're hoping to publish it come January. So I'll let you know if when that happens.
Awesome. Katie, we do have NAMA next year, July in Fort Myers, Florida. So maybe that could be something we can think about presenting to as well. So thank you. Question from Julie. If programs don't have the same type of funding, ideas how they could approach doing this type of work. Any thoughts, folks? I'll let the panelists go first. Pensive looks. Okay, so I have some thoughts. Possibly, there's always grants out there. There's, state, federal potential funding too as well. CDC, FDA. There's sometimes stuff that you could use around community engagement for that. We've done that before in the past. Not the Hazardous Waste program, but other projects I've managed before in the past that we partnered with the Department of Ecology or Washington State Department of Health, CDC, FDA too as well. So there's potentials to do that. Another question we had was, as King County demographics continue to change, what communities will you be working with, and what methods do you use to identify those communities? So yes, definitely, the county is getting much more diverse as we speak. Lots of immigration is coming to King County since we do sit on the Pacific Rim. Also, we do have the Afghan refugees coming as well. So, I'll start out, I'll jump into as well. I think we only have a couple minutes left. So we do use GIS. We work with our King County GIS folks. We work with our research team within the Hazardous Waste program. We work with public health, our Department of Natural Resources and Parks too as well. So we do get updated demographics. We do use GIS quite a bit with our program. Also just kind of on the ground, right? We have a lot of our folks that are on the ground doing this work, and we're seeing the different demographic trends, as well as for like our business services, what processes, procedures, chemicals that we're looking at that might be a cause of concern for us in hazardous waste. Anybody else want to jump in around identifying communities? Not hearing anything. Oh, yep, from Catherine. Florida would love to have us there, Katie. So think of something that for next year too as well. Steve was saying we're pushing EPA to provide funding for local programs to help businesses to safer alternatives when chemicals are banned through TSCA. So that's a great point, Steve. Appreciate it. Let's see, any more for Q&A there? I think that's all we have there for the Q&A. Kelly, do we have any more time, or is this it for a session?
You guys still have, I think, 15 more minutes.
Oh, okay.
According to my schedule, we break for lunch at 10:45 Pacific and come back.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so you guys have plenty of time.
All right. Any more questions in the Q&A chat bar? Don't be shy. We got a bunch of experts here. Any questions for us?
Did we answer the question about chromium leach levels?
Oh, we did not. Thank you. That's for Katie. Did you look at chromium leach levels from stainless steel cookware when evaluating them?
Yes, we did. So we looked at chromium and nickel, in addition to lead and a few other metals. And there was only one pot that we purchased that leached a little bit higher levels of chromium than we would like to see. One thing with and this goes actually for most of the pots, but one thing with stainless steel is that on the first use, it's going to leach a lot of metals from the pot, which will decrease over time. In fact, if you ever read the instructions when you purchase a new cook pot, it does say to boil a pot of water in it before using it to cook any food. And that'll hopefully get rid of most of the major exposure that might happen with the first use. So unfortunately, I can't tell you what happened after the second time with that pot that leached a lot of chromium. But the rest of the stainless steel cookware was just fine and didn't leach any significant amounts of lead that would be above what you want to consume.
Great. Thanks, Kenny. Thanks for that tip. I don't think I've ever done that. Probably I'm the one that doesn't read the instructions, just throws them away, and for most things. And so that's a great tip. I know also. I was wondering, did you ever test the Instapot? I know there's stainless steel liners for those. I have them. A lot of folks have them too as well.
We have not tested the Instapot. If you, we certainly we could. We're open to testing different cookware. I did see that somebody had mentioned one of the green pan brands, and unfortunately, we can't test every single item and brand of cookware out there. There's just way too much. But if there's something that seems like it may be a concern, we certainly will look into it.
Great, thanks, Katie. I think we had questions here. One was, is the budget for the state or the county? So our budget, it's county level. So for us, it's a county program across the 4 different implementation agencies. Also, so we are delegated to do the work for an entire county. Another question. Oh, this one's, I think there was one here. What are the cultural barriers for governments going into new arrival homes? So I think that really, Julia, Matt, I think that's a good one for you all to answer.
Can you repeat that question? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Oh, cultural barriers. What are some of the cultural barriers you all ran into going into the new immigrant arrival homes?
Right. So it's certainly understanding the relationship that many newly arrived Afghan families have with our federal government, and how that really kind of trickles down all the way to the local level. So families can often see our presence as equating to ones that they experienced back at home, and so it's recognizing that, and so it's working. Is partnering with our community health workers, such as with Afghan Health Initiative, that to help try to break down those barriers that we know exist, and that's where we've seen success. And so we are fortunate that we're able to contract with another community health worker recently now to help us continue with our EBLL investigations with families. So that's really taken us a long way versus us trying to communicate with families ourselves through over the phone interpretation, which has not led to nearly the kind of success.
Thanks, Matt. Julia, did you want to jump in on that one too?
Sure. There definitely, we need to be aware of culture, and that's one of the reasons why Hazardous partners with and contracts with community-based organizations, in this case like Mother Africa, who would know the different communities and that we work with. Or I would say that even in this virtual time, we had to deal with, I don't know if it was cultural barriers, but last year, one of the big things that Mother Africa ended up doing was, when we had to pivot and go to virtual, they needed to teach people how to use Zoom, and teach people, which is what we ended up using, and teach people how to connect by their phone. So that was a big thing as part of the Hazardous education. And just the cultural barriers, be aware of what people actually are needing. I mean, because we were with Mother Africa and folks were needing rental assistance or food assistance, Mother Africa was able to sort of take a package, or holistic would be a better approach, to take a holistic approach to folks that they were connecting with, not only sharing this Safer Healthy Homes information, but also diapers, rental assistance, and whatever else. So that's just being thoughtful and aware of where people actually are as we're trying to share this hazardous waste information.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think also another question was like, how do we look at, how do we look at potential new communities to work with as well? So, what methods do we use? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
Well, we do have a racial equity team at Hazardous, so that's one big thing I would do is talk with them. We have a process called results-based accountability that we're working with. It was an entire program, which is data-driven, but also racial. We're also using racial equity to focus on that data. So that would be one thing that we would do, and to talk about it as a team. Multiple teams would be involved. Wouldn't be one person's decision. That's what I would say about that.
Good. For that one, Matt, I don't know, can you talk about the new contract for lead going into our African-American communities and Asian communities?
Yeah, so we're in the early stages of developing a project that's centered around formative research and learning about the concerns that community members in the African American and Pacific Islander communities have with regards to hazardous waste exposure, including lead exposure. And so we're just writing up the scope of work there, but our hopes are to connect with community members to learn when their kind of baseline level of understanding of hazardous waste exposure around the home and also lead exposure, but then also how we can most successfully connect with community members to get our education, our messaging out to them in order to promote our healthy homes education.
Great, thanks for answering that question, Matt. Another one from Dave Ward. Ashley, one of your slides shows some dry cleaners that look happy with the change to water-based. Can you talk more about that?
Sure, thank you, Dave. Yeah, we had one shop in particular that was actually a new shop owner and had only been working in dry cleaning at all, as a PERC dry cleaner for less than a year. And so they weren't very experienced with dry cleaning in the first place. And so when they switched to professional wet cleaning, it just took a lot of work for the vendors and us and other people to come in and really help train them up on professional wet cleaning. Professional wet cleaning does take a higher skill level than PERC. And so that was just a process. I think Katie jumped in, but I do think that a later survey revealed they were happier. Jump in, Katie, if you want to. I see you came off mute.
Yeah, so we definitely followed up with the shops. We had a few that had mentioned that they weren't completely satisfied with their equipment, and we would offer them additional training, and we went to the shops a few times ourselves to try to problem solve what was happening, and then we would go back again and do it the same kind of post survey to see how they're feeling. And all of the shops that had originally showed that they weren't completely satisfied had at least moved up one, or if not two, on the scale.
Great, thanks for answering that. That's right. I remember that all that follow-up you guys did. Really appreciate that, and making sure we have happy customers here in the county. More cookware questions from anonymous attendee. So probably Katie, jump on this one. Should we be worried about cookware purchased in the U.S.? Target, Walmart, Costco, and also looking at cookware in restaurants serving the public.
Yes, we only purchased from the U.S. Like, as I mentioned, we went to some local international type markets in the county, and then we did purchase some from Amazon, Home Depot, Alibaba Express, and Etsy. And really the only aluminum cookware that was of concern that we purchased online came from either Amazon or from Etsy. So I would just, if you're going to be purchasing locally, I would just purchase from known reputable brands. A lot of the cookware I bought came in a plastic bag that didn't have a brand on it. So I think if you're buying, for example, one of the stainless steel cookware sets that Residential Services is offering to families is a simple, rather cheap Cuisinart stainless steel set that can be purchased pretty much everywhere. And then in terms of aluminum cookware in restaurants, that is definitely something that we are looking into. We would love to be able to go to some restaurants and test the cookware being used there with an XRF. And that is on our list of something to do to follow up on this project.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I used to, a long time ago, I worked in a food program, so in King County, and I think there's over 10,000 food establishments in King County that are probably using some type of form of aluminum cookware. So, that could be another phase of our project too as well. We had a question from Alice Chapman within our program, probably for others that may not know what a community health worker does. Matt, you want to jump in and answer that one?
Sure thing, and I think Julia could chime in as well there. So for us, a community health worker, they are a connector for us with families, with community members, particularly, again, with our work with Afghan families, because they speak the language, they understand the culture, and they help kind of bridge that gap that they have to help families recognize that our involvement with them is, to help and not to create barriers or to make life more difficult as they might understand it or have experienced in other settings. And so it's really to help build that relationship, that trust. And so that's what they really bring to the table for our home visits, is that because again, as I mentioned, otherwise there's this disconnect, and language alone can really drive this wedge between us and family, and makes connecting, especially follow-up, super difficult. So they play a very integral role in that.
And then I'll just jump in. The community health workers at Mother Africa did a tremendous amount. I mean, they learned all the Safer Healthy Homes content. We interacted with it. We created an approach. Then for Mother Africa, they are actually speaking Arabic, French, or Mai. First of all, they recruited participants. So they recruited folks who wanted to participate. Then they set up a time to talk with them. They did a pre-visit virtual visit survey on the phone, and then they set up a time to actually do the presentation, and we broke it into 2 parts. They follow up, they respond with questions. Participants might call them out of the blue and say, hey, I'm shopping, can you help me figure out what I'm supposed to be buying? So they respond to those kind of questions. We also are doing virtual workshops and field trips so that the Mother Africa health promoters act as interpreters, like on the spot interpreters for that content. So they need to know the content. In fact, we practice. They need to learn that content too, and we practice and talk about it. They help with translated materials. So even though we work with our communications team to get material translated, but the Mother Africa community read and gave feedback, comments on, was that translation going to work for their community? And then they definitely felt like during COVID in particular, community health workers were acting as a lifeline for people who were stuck at home and who speak other languages and might not understand, as many of us did not understand, what is COVID, what's happening, you're home alone, how are you supposed to be managing all of these things? So they were an incredibly important connection and support for their community. So they were doing so many things. That's just part of it. Thanks, Alice, for the question.
Thank you all for answering.
Charles,
go ahead, Larry.
I just wanted to make sure that Marie, she put a question for me in the chat.
Oh yeah, saw that. Go for it.
And so hopefully she saw that. That's why we picked English, Spanish, and Vietnamese as the 3 most common languages based on interviewing all the shops, owners and painters. So
Good to know. Any other questions? And I think we're at time now, right, Kelly?
That's right. You guys are at time.